Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of heavy hidden gems. This is where we expose the viewer out there to maybe some bands and albums that might be off their radar, a little bit of a digging deeper. And for this episode, we are going to be digging deeper into the world of prog rock. And, we wanted to go beyond those surface bands that we all know already. We all know King Crimson, yes, Rush, and all that. So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper than that. And to do that, I had to call in a specialist. So joining me here today from Stockholm, Sweden, is Henrik Johansen. Henrik is, outside of being a huge Prog fan, a Prog aficionado, he's also a musician. He's a drummer who plays in the groups Dead Cosmonauts, Bass Group 3, and he also has a YouTube channel called Maiden Stockholm. He's also a diehard Iron Maiden fan. And Henrik, as well as his friend and my friend Matthias, you may have seen Matthias here at the Lair. He did an Iron Maiden Deep Cuts video with us. He did a Candlemass video with us. Well, Henrik and Matthias on their YouTube channel, they go around Stockholm and show you all the locations that Iron Maiden has played in and around Stockholm since the beginning of the band. So it's really fascinating. I'm going to put a link to that in the description down below. Here's a little sneak peek here at the Lair. I'm going to be starting a series called Midweek Maiden, where on Wednesdays, I'm going to have friends coming on and we're going to be talking about all kinds of different Iron Maiden topics. So I'm going to see if we can get Henrik to come on our Midweek Maiden program too, because I know he's a diehard Maiden fan. We'll probably get our buddy Matthias back here for that. He won't be able to say no to that, I have a feeling. So, okay, Henrik, thank you for joining me here at the Lair.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, so tell us, when did you get into prog rock? Like, who was your band that got you into prog rock? Who was your gateway band?
The gateway band is, of course, Iron Maiden. I mean, they are very keen to call themselves a prog rock band these days, and they surely have proggy elements. But I mean, it was through them and through the bands they listened to that I sort of started discovering, going from Jethro Tull, they covered Cross-Eyed Mary and stuff like that. And Bruce mentioning Arthur Brown in interviews, and I don't know if Arthur Brown is considered prog, but he's one of those underground British acts going on, so it's really all thanks to Iron Maiden.
Yeah, it's the same for me. Iron Maiden was great at they did a lot of covers, and so you would always hear Steve talk about Jethro Tull and Wishbone Ash. And I wouldn't really consider Wishbone Ash proggish, but maybe a little bit at times. But you hear Steve talk about his prog influences. So, okay, well, for this episode, we wanted to go deeper. I think most of the viewers out there are familiar with Yes and Rush and stuff like that. So we wanted to dig a little deeper. That's what we do here at Heavy Hidden Gems. Now, I'm also going to be taking the audio from this and using it on the Layer of the Alchemist Spotify podcast. And on the Spotify podcast, Henrik is going to pick a song from each one of the bands that he talks about. I believe he has 5 bands. And he's going to pick a song from each one of those bands. And you will hear not only the audio from this YouTube video, but you will get to hear the songs then. I can't play the songs here on the YouTube channel due to copyright reasons. So you'll hear Henrik recommend a song. And if you go on over to the podcast episode, then you'll get to hear the song that he picked. And even if you don't, I know viewers out there have commented that you have to have a subscription to Spotify to hear the entire song. If you don't have a subscription, you'll hear an excerpt of the song. So even if you don't have a subscription to Spotify, I encourage you to listen, because you'll still get to hear a little bit of the song, and it'll let you know, hey, maybe this is a group that you want to dig deeper in and you want to check out. So, okay, I'll leave a link to the Spotify podcast in the description down below. All right, so let's get into it. What do you got here for your first pick, Henrik?
Yeah, if we're going to be digging deep, I'm going to start at the very, very shallow end, and it's going to be the Underground Generator. I mean, one of the, I think it's one of the first bands that Bruce Dickinson mentioned in interviews that I didn't, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden, that is, mentioned in interviews. And I sort of, what's this band cropping up? And it's utterly bizarre, and they are very unique, I'd say, in the way they sound. I mean, at first when I listened to them, I didn't get it at all. But then I sort of, I don't know, I think I indoctrinated, is that a word? I indoctrinated myself with them, and I totally love it now. It's one of my absolute favorite bands of all time.
What was the album that you just held up?
The album I held up is Pawn Hearts, released in 1971 or 2. I don't have my visual aid to see the year, but it's around there. And it's one of their absolutely most out there albums when it comes to sound and stuff. I mean, the lineup to start with was drums, organ, saxophone, and vocals, and occasional guitar. So they have a really unique starting point in that, and it's very spacey and atmospheric and also chaotic. And the chaotic element is really what I like about it, because most people think about prog as a very fiddly sort of virtuoso music. And I mean, the guys in Vandergraaf are top-notch musicians, but they do something totally different with it. And loads of effects, playing double saxophone through octave pedals and stuff, so it gets like 8 chord things going on. It's a fascinating soundscape.
Yeah, and it's a good band if you're a metalhead and you're just sort of wanting to start to dig deeper into prog. I think they're a good band, because they do have some kind of heavier elements to them, but it's heaviness not necessarily in like guitar power chords. It's more like the density of the sound. Like, I think when I listened to them, they did at times had a real kind of dense sound, like there's kind of a lot going on, but then there's other moments where there's very little going on, and it's almost like you said, they have sort of a spacey vibe to them, maybe that kind of feel to what they do. I know a song that I liked off that record was A Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, I believe is the title, and but it was a pretty long one.
That song, and the title itself is a mouthful. The song is like 25 minutes long or something like that. So, but it's a fantastic odyssey into their music, I say.
Yeah, and the Iron Maiden connection. So when I was discussing this episode with Henrik, he gave me his list, and I made a Spotify playlist so I could check these out. And some of them I was familiar with already. I had heard, of course, the name Van de Graaff Generator, and I had listened to some of their stuff, but I hadn't really put a lot of time in. And when I first listened to the first song on here, I had to go and check the year of the recording, because I thought it sounds so much like Bruce at times. You can hear what an influence this was on Bruce Dickinson, that I thought, is this like a more modern one? And did Bruce like sing on this? There were moments where I was really like, is that Bruce? Like, there's certain little parts of the singer's range that sound, and the way he phrases his lines and everything really sounds like Bruce. And I even went and looked, and I was like, okay, I thought maybe you had given me an album that's like a recent album, and maybe Bruce guested on and sang a few lines or something. And I was like, whoa, this is like I don't forget what year that particular album is, but it's from the 70s, I remember. And so if you're a Maiden fan out there and you haven't heard Van de Graaff Generator, and you want to hear where Bruce gets his sort of style from, and in style more in the sense of like the way he accents and his phrasing and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you're going to hear it in Van de Graaff Generator. It's
a lot of the more declamatory things that Bruce is doing when he's not really singing melodies, more like stating things.
Yeah,
riding through dust clouds and barren wastes, galloping hard on the plains. I mean, it's more like that kind of thing rather than the operatic. But the operatic element is there as well. So it's but when it comes to Van der Graaf, there's another album as well, which might be easier. You're not going to see this. It's only going to be reflecting. It's God Bluff from 1975. It's a fantastic album. And it's the band split up in 72 and then they reformed in 75, and they sound very different, but you still hear it's the same band. So that was the album I sort of got into them through, really. And it's, I don't know, I was going to say it's more laid back, but it's not as spacey, but it's still very layered and very storytelling in its way.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a Hawkwind sound. I hear also that sort of spacey. Hawkwind's a little more jammy than Van de Graaff, but maybe from that. And they're British, right? Van de Graaff.
They're British, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. It sounds German. I thought maybe it could have been like a German krautrock type of sound. But you got a song you would recommend from Van de Graaff Generator for people to check out?
I'm gonna say, why not check out Scorched Earth from God Bluff? It's a fantastic song.
All right, so if you're out there listening on the Spotify podcast, here's a Scorched Earth from Van de Graaff Generator. Okay, what do you got for your next pick?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to something we mentioned, and that is gonna be good old Arthur Brown. But this is his project that he started in the early 70s called Kingdom Come. The album is called Journey, and the only reason I got this album is because Bruce Dickinson, again, recorded a cover in 1993 of the song Spirit of Joy that's on this album, Journey. And the cover is it's not really that interesting, but the album in itself is really unique because I guess it's one of the first, if not the first album to feature a drum machine on the entire album. And this is 1973. And as most of you can guess, it's not really sounding huge and fantastic in that sense, but it is really, it's got character. And I do like that because the soundscapes are very spacey. I mean, you mentioned Hawkwind, and it's got this Hawkwind vibe going with synthesizer sounds and phasers and everything like that. And then the drum machine doing beats, and then Arthur Brown's very dramatic and, operatic song vocals to this. It's a really great album. And I was gonna see if, no, there's only actually 7 tracks on it. I mean, they're not very long, but they are very, I would say their journeys in themselves. Perhaps that's why the album's called that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very, like you mentioned, I didn't realize that there were electronic drums on it. I mean, I knew that there was something going on because it's a very there's electronic, a lot of electronic sounds in it, and kind of like kind of an experimental, almost like soundtracky kind of vibe to it at times. And of course, Arthur Brown is from the Crazy World of Arthur Brown and the song Fire. Yeah. Most people would recognize that. Now, the Crazy World of Arthur Brown is before this, or is it? Okay.
It's before. That album came out in 60.
Yeah, like late 60s or something, yeah.
And this one is 1973, I guess. So it's a bit like, I mean, he did release a few albums in between. I don't know if this is the first one under the Kingdom Come moniker, but he did release Galactic Zoo Dossier, which I think was the second one after. I'm not going to say anything else because I'm going to make a fool of myself. But I mean, this is not his second album. This is a few albums down the line. So
yeah. All right. Well, we got a song from that album that you would recommend. I'm going to say this now. I would recommend Time Captives, but the thing is, it starts out with like 2 or 3 minutes of only drum machine beat, and that's not going to be interesting for those who are going to be listening to Spotify and only hearing snippets of the songs. So I might actually go for Superficial Roadblocks. Okay. All right. So if you're out there here in Spotify land, here is Superficial Roadblocks from Arthur Brown and Kingdom Come. Okay. What do you got next for us here?
Yeah, let's continue. I mean, I realize this is going both from, the shallower bit of and going deeper, and it's also going from older to newer. It was not conscious that way, it just so happens. And the next band is called I hesitate to translate it because it's a made-up word. Gnidrolog. I don't know how to translate it really, how to pronounce it, sorry. And it's a British band. The name is derived from two brothers, Stuart and Colin Goldring, who sort of like switched their surname around and inserted a few letters. So it's almost Goldring. It's Goldring, but well, anyway. And this is really weird because now we come to another band that I'm not going to be featuring here because I deem them too well known in Prog, and it's Gentle Giant. But I am a huge fan of their music, and they had in the 90s they had an actual fanzine, a physical fanzine, where they had loads of articles covering Gentle Giant stuff, but also recommendations by people of other bands, and Gnidrolog was one of them. I'd never heard about them, and when I went into a music store and saw the album, I bought it immediately because they were sort of like described as, oh, they're very similar, and I really loved the Gentle Giant sound. Turns out they're not very similar, but they are, but I can see where they get the idea of the similarity from. I mean, Gentle Giant is totally unique with their classical approach to composing music for a rock band, whereas Gnidrolog is a bit more traditional in that sense, but they're still very unique in their own way. I would say, I think there are 4 people in the sort of like in their set lineup, and then they have guests doing stuff. I mean, the brothers play guitar and they play flute and stuff, and they have a bass player and drummer, so it's no keyboards at all, I think. And the singer he has got this really high pitched, almost Geddy Lee type voice, or like what's the guy from Budgie who recently passed away? Buck Shelley. Yeah, more of that really high vocal quality, and which might take some getting used to, but I think I've gotten used to it, so I haven't really thought much about it since I got into the band and the music.
I could see the Gentle Giant comparison a little bit. There's that little bit of, I don't want to say folky, but maybe because of the flute and English sounding, prog type thing. Maybe Renaissance would be another group that reminds me slightly of that pastoral type of sound. Maybe it's the flutes and the wind instruments that give it that feel, but it does have some like rock elements to it too that I think are really cool. Yeah, I'm not gonna attempt the hazardous thing of showing a CD again, but I think this is their first album. Both of them were released in 1972, but I think this is the first one, and it's called In Spite of Harry's Toenail, which is a really weird title. And it's apparently the Goldring brothers' father was called Harry, and there was some joke about he was going to be kicked them out, and the only thing they were going to be remembering from him was the toenail stuck in their bottom parts. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I read somewhere. It's a great story. It's a great story. Yeah. And this album has the intro track called Long Live Man Dead. It's recorded in 72, so you need to have that in mind. But I still think it's a really hard-hitting, heavy thing. I don't know if you managed to get hold of and listen to all this. Because I think that's a really good, it's unique and it's heavy in its own very quirky way. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Quirky, kind of heavy twists and turns. Maybe that's also where the Gentle Giant had a lot of weird twists and turns in their music, and this is kind of the same way. It's sort of heavy one moment, then all of a sudden it drops into a lighter, folky type feel thing, and then it shifts back. And I personally love that kind of stuff, and I really like the, you mentioned that it's 1972, so you got to keep that in mind with the sound quality, but I kind of like that 70s kind of simple, little dry production. It's just kind of, it's there in front of you. It's not like all kinds of studio trickery and everything. It's a simple sounding recording, but it works for me. And I think it works well with this type of music that's supposed to feel sort of earthy at times. I think these sort of simple productions work for that. Was there a song that
stuck out for you that you sort of
That first
felt?
track you mentioned, yeah, the opening track
Yeah.
on.
Mm.
So should we recommend
On
that
the
one
Toenail.
for the people to listen?
No, I was just asking because there are so few people who have heard this band, so I haven't really been able to talk to anyone about it really. So it's interesting to know what other people think, because I also think that the opening track on the Lady Lake album, it's called "I Will Never Be a Soldier," which is in effect it's very folky and English in that way, but it's also when it comes to the chorus, it's almost like a power ballad in that sense. But I'm not saying it in the cheesy way. It's more of the trying to be grandiose, but I think it's anthemic. I think that's a good word to describe it. And there's we can make a really weird Iron Maiden connection here again. And I am stretching it a lot, I know, but the bass player in Gnidrolog, he went on to do a lot of session work. Peter Mars Colling, Mars is his nickname, and he played on the Pat Travers albums that Nico McBrain played on. And I've been trying to listen to the Pat Travers albums to see if I can hear any sort of his style or anything like that. I don't know, but I don't think I've been able to listen enough to Pat Travers because I think his music is too uninteresting for me. But
I'm glad you mentioned the bass player, because as a bass player myself, it jumped out at me. The bass playing is really great on this record.
It's
and
great.
I love his sound. His sound is very, can't tell if maybe he's using a fretless bass at times, or it just has a real woody, like natural, almost like upright bass, wood type sound to it. It's really great. There's some great bass playing on it. And I actually, went and I was like, oh, who's the bass player on this? And I wanted to see if he had played with anybody else. And it did lead me to Pat Travers, which led me to Nico McBrain. This is sort of, we have 5 degrees of separation from Iron Maiden here. We can connect, let's see if we can connect all these things to Iron Maiden in one way or another.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, it's the playing in general is great on it, but the bass playing on it really jumped out at me. So.
And the drummer, Nigel Pegram, I think his name is, he went on to play with a British folk band called Steel Eyed Span. I don't know if anyone knows them, but
I recognize that,
he played on a few albums with them. So,
okay, well, got a song you would recommend from them?
I am torn between actually Long Live Man Dead or I Would Never Be a Soldier. I don't know which one. I mean, Long Live Man Dead is perhaps the most striking one of them. So let's go for that one.
Okay. So here's Long Live Man Dead, if you're out there listening on Spotify. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the band.
I tried.
Grindel something. Grindel
Gnidrolog. Yeah. Well.
Gnidrolog. Okay. What do you got for your next pick?
Now, the next bit, we are jumping ahead at least. No, we're not. I am forgetting. We are only going 1 year ahead to 1973, and Britain again. It always happens to be Britain, and the band is called Griffon. I was actually a bit hesitant if I was going to include them in something called a prog thingy, because to me they're a lot more folky and perhaps medieval in their style, but I mean, they're playing it in a rock band setting, plus wind instruments and things. So I think it's valid in that sense. The album in particular, I only have a combination CD release of them, but the album is Red Queen to Griffon 3 from 1973 is the one that I would recommend to anyone who wants to listen to Robin Hood meets his fate. I don't know.
I actually really like this one. I'm a fan of medieval and Renaissance music, so this just really jumped out at me because it's got that all over it. It's got like medieval type instruments, crumb horns, and things like that. I was even watching there's a video of them, I think, live in London. I think you can watch. It's on, I think, a TV show or something where they play a couple songs. But I find it really interesting. Little editor's note here: there is a metal band from the 80s. Called Griffon. I believe it's spelled differently. It's something like something from the I can't remember. I have the record. Flight of the Griffon, I think is the name of the.
Yeah, I
the
think it's
80s
two
metal
Fs
album.
rather.
Yeah.
Griffon, two Fs rather. Yeah.
But yeah, this is really interesting if you're into like the more folky medieval Renaissance vibe and element to your prog. It's really cool. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and this ties in a lot with my Gentle Giant period, if I would call it that, when I started listening to Gentle Giant in the 90s. And it was a friend of mine who introduced me to them, and he also had this album by Griffon, and it was just me absorbing everything. And I mean, it's really, I hate to call it, accomplished musical music, but it's inventive and it's virtuosic. What do you say? How do you call it?
Yeah.
Right, I don't know, but it's not showing offy. It's just, this is what the song needs, and we're going to play it like this. And I like that because it's really intricate, the arrangements and all that, and the playing is fantastic because they sort of like it's all over the place when it comes to, if we're going to go music history here, it's going to be medieval, it's going to be Renaissance, it's going to be Baroque, it's going to be everything, a lot of classical elements in them, and then you have it all played by drums and electric bass and guitar. So it's and organs and flutes and chrome horns, as you say.
Yes. And that particular album that you mentioned, what is it? Griffon to
Red Queen to Griffon 3.
To Griffon 3 is a chess reference, and the album is just sort of a chess theme.
Yeah.
There's only, I think, 4 or 5 songs on the album, and they all have kind of a chess.
The tracks are Opening Move and Second Spasm, and then it's Lament, and the last one is Checkmate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Lament maybe doesn't have too much with chess, but I mean, they had to call it something.
Yeah, so it's a cool, it's a fun record if you're into that kind of classical medieval Renaissance mixed with like a rock type setting. So what would you recommend for people to check out from them?
Before I mention that, I'm gonna actually mention that the flute keyboard player guy, Richard Harvey, in the band, he went on to make a lot of like movie music and film music and scoring movies and stuff like that. And I always kept an eye open at the end, at the end titles, just to see if he had done stuff. And I've never really, to this day, seen anything that he's done. But I've been checking once in a while, and he actually conducted the orchestra that recorded the music for the movie Interstellar.
Okay.
And that's really weird because Interstellar is something very modern of today, and Griffon is something from way back and from my past in sense of music and what I'm listening to at the moment. So it was an interesting sort of like wave from a familiar time. But yeah, sorry.
No connection to Iron Maiden though?
I haven't managed to find one. I don't know. If we're going to go 6 degrees, I'm sure we can do that. But then I know too little about.
All right, well, everybody out there, if you can help us, if somebody can connect Griffon in some ways, our 5-6 degrees of separation here, if you can connect the Griffon to Iron Maiden somehow, leave it in the comments for the video.
The Rolls-Royce Griffon engine of the Spitfires, of the later Spitfires, was, I mean, it was an engine for an airplane, and Bruce is a huge fan of airplanes.
Okay.
Well, that's me really trying to squeeze and reference in.
All right, so what would you recommend a song from Griffon for people to check out?
I would actually go for Lament, because I think that's the most songy song of them. I mean, all of them are great, but I think Lament is really, to me, it's been the one that it was the first one I heard that really caught my interest, and I love the melodies and stuff in it. And it goes from very soft and sweet to chaotic and weird. So it's a good one.
Okay, Lament from Griffon for everybody out there in Spotify land. Okay, I think we're on our last one, aren't we?
Are we? I think actually we have two bits left. Yeah.
All right.
Is this stretching it? Do I need to rethink stuff?
No, we're doing good here.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with, now we're gonna be jumping ahead in time and in geography, because we are ending up in Sweden. And it's gonna be Anekdoten. Can't be I can't talk about Prog and not mention Anekdoten and Nucleus. This album, it's their second album, and to me, it's always my automatic answer when someone asks me what's the best album in the world. It's always going to be this, and I'm not going to say always, but it's usually this one. They formed in the early 90s, released their first album in 92, and this one came out in 93 actually, and this one came out in 95. They've been releasing albums after that as well, and I mean the Nucleus album, the sound and everything on it, it is relentless, remorseless, it's brutal, it's fantastic. And I assume you listen to it as well.
Yeah.
As a bass player,
yeah.
What do you make of the bass?
Oh yeah, there's great playing on it. This is now we're sort of moving into what I would say is more like a 90s modern prog, I guess, if you will, you know, for fans of, if you're into the more modern stuff like Steve Wilson and Porcupine Tree and things like that, this is sort of getting more into that realm. Yeah, it's really cool. There's also almost like it's proggish, but I could see fans of like indie rock and more like them also enjoying this kind of sound, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's very well produced, so it's not like it's lo-fi or anything like that. It's very well produced, but there's sort of this experimental nature to it, but it's not really prog in the sense of like big long keyboard solos and shreddy guitar and stuff like that. It's more prog in like the arrangements and the tones, and the guitar sounds are you know, cleaner guitar sounds at times rather than, you know, like a prog. It's not like a prog metal thing. I wouldn't describe it as prog metal, but there's enough heaviness there that if you're a metal fan, I think you'll like it. If you're a fan of more like indie rock and experimental stuff on that side, I think you would like it too. So there's kind of a lot of elements to it that I think will appeal to a lot of different people. If you're coming from the Steve Wilson side of the fence of things, the more 90s prog things, I think you'll also find things to like on this.
I think when you mentioned the 90s indie thing, that's a spot on thing for their sound, especially on the Nucleus album, because it is, as you say, it's not really prog in that grand sense, but it is, I mean, the bass, I mean, it's very King Crimson influenced. I mean, the first album is a lot more of King Crimson influence than the second one, but it's got that dissonant thing going, and it's mellotron all over the place. So and it's not really, you know, for the huge wonderful landscapes, it's more actually adding to some kind of distress rather, and I love that sound. And there's strings on it as well. They have a cello player, so it's no, I mean, I don't know, I get it's difficult to talk about that album because it's so much of me now, because I have sort of like listened to it so much that it's a part of my DNA. So I can't really look back on it and see what do I like about it. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, definitely. This is a band that you know, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have a mutual friend, our friend Matthias, and he turned me on to this band very early on, and I've heard a lot of the different musical projects that Henrik has been involved in, and him and Matthias have worked together on many things. And this is definitely, I hear the, you know, the influence of this band on their work. So what would you recommend? Probably hard to pick a song, yes, since you like it all, but what would you recommend?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I was sort of like going between two albums, either Nucleus from 95 or Gravity from, I think it's 2003 or something like that. And I'm not sure, because Nucleus is my favorite album, but I think there's fantastic stuff on Gravity as well. But I'm going to keep rambling while I'm looking at the titles to see what I'm going to choose. And I'm actually going to say, I have to say This Far from the Sky from the Nucleus album. Okay. It's very proggy because it's a very long song with loads of different parts, but it's also, the mellotron work on it is just fantastic. Melodic stuff and the themes interweaved. It's great.
Okay, all right. So
brutal.
This Far from the Sky, Anekdoten for everybody out there in Spotify land. All right, we're on our last one. This has been, we've had a really nice journey here through a bunch of different, I really like the selections that you picked, because you're getting a different, if you like the 70s type of thing, there's some of that here for you to check out. With Anecdoten, it's a little bit more bringing us into the 90s and the 00s. So you're getting a different flavors here from all these bands, which I think is great.
Yeah, and sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you want to move on to the next one, or you can...
I can move on to the next one, and I'm going to stay in Sweden, and I'm going to go for a band which has a name that's not going to be making a lot of sense, but Gösta Berling's Saga is the name of the band. It's from a novel by a Swedish writer called Selma Lagerlöf. It's her debut novel, I think it is. It's basically the story of Gösta Berling is the translation of now. Gösta Berling being the name of a decadent priest, I think the story goes. I haven't really read it. So. But anyway, the band chose the name for some reason. I don't know why, but they are a current band. I think they sort of like started in the early noughties, as you say in English. But so they might be coming on like 20 years now, but they released their first album in like 15 years ago, something like that. Stockholm-based band and totally instrumental. And I've known about them and heard bits of them on and off, but I didn't really listen to them until I saw them live by, I'm not going to say by mistake, but they were part of a package that played, and I went to see another band, and I was gobsmacked by it because I thought it was really, I mean, they had so much. If you know the French band Magma, they had a lot of that weird thing going on with instrumental things, just, going on and on and on and on and on, and then adding bits to it and being very, dissonant and jazzy in that sense. And I really liked that sound. So I made it my business to go and see them live again. And then it turns out I had to wait like 2 or 3 years to see them. And that time the reaction was the same. So I had to buy the albums that they had on sale there. So no, I think it's just fantastic. I've only been using adjectives. I'm not there to describe anything. So please ask for clarification.
No, I really like this one. This was it. The music, it has like a soundtracky. Is that a soundtracky? Soundtrack like vibe to it, but it's like a vibe. For some reason in my mind, I had like, it's like a spy movie feel to some of these songs or something. There's sort of this like lurking around dark alleys, and it's sort of kind of atmospheric, and it was just painting these pictures in my mind of like, spies and somebody in an alley or something like that, and dark alleys and London streets just with, a light and foggy streets or something. I really liked it. And there was one particular song on it. We talked about it off air that to me was just, I heard, I got to listen to that again, because it's, again, this is not prog in the sense of like, long keyboard solos or something like that. This is more like in the textures and the atmosphere, the mood that they're creating with it, with the sounds. And it's very, and personally, this is why I had you on the show, Henrik, because I'm not, I'm a surface level prog guy. I'm a Yes, Rush and stuff like that. I don't go super deep with it. And the reason why I don't tend to go super deep with it is that I don't particularly like the stuff that's really like long keyboard solos and stuff like that. And this is why I loved all your selections, and because they were all a little bit different. And this one especially, because it illustrates that you can be proggy without just being like long guitar solos. And this is maybe the opposite of Van de Graaff Generator, which was kind of dense at times. This is more spatial in the sounds. There's more openness to the sounds, and it's more about textures and little things kind of coming in and out and setting moods. But there are times where there's, distorted bass and, where it is more driving and stuff, but it's this contrast between those moods of the more driving stuff. The distorted bass jumped out at me at times, but then these more atmospheric type of things. It's really enjoyable. I really dug this one.
Yeah. To me, they're in the same area as Van der Graaf when it comes to the more spacey stuff, but I think Van der Graaf are bound to be, I mean, we've been talking about only their 70s, Van der Graaf 70s stuff, but they're bound to be categorized or, judged from sounding 70s in a way that, so we sort of like look at them as a part of the 70s sound. But I think this shares a lot with the spaciness and the things just go on. They don't really necessarily, oh, here's the melody and now something's going to happen. It's just going on, and then it differs because you change the register on the bass or something like that. And I really like the way that and that's definitely something that's similar to Magma and the French band Magma and stuff like that. So I really like that driving, monotonous, but not monotonous in a boring way, but monotonous in a sort of like repetitive way.
Yeah, it draws you in. It's like hypnotizes you a little bit. You're right. Exactly. It is very like hypnotic at times, and it sort of lulls you in. And again, these things are sort of shifting and changing. There isn't any big bombastic type things. It's more of like we just said, sort of hypnotic, and it entrances you.
And then there are 5 guys, I think, and they tend to play, they do play a lot of different instruments as well. So a lot of times, a lot of the music from the Et X album is there's a lot of electronic instruments on them. And when they do that live, they tend to, the bass player has pedals and stuff, but he also can play keyboards and stuff to do things. So there are songs that are more or less keyboard based, and they're still fantastic because they have the same, the melodic quality is there, and the modes are all there. So it's interesting that they have the courage to use sounds like that and not feel confined to their instruments only.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to recommend a song for this band because I really, really love this one, Fort Europa. So that's what we're going to play here on Spotify. Give us the name of the band. I'm not going to try to butcher the name of the band.
They are called Gösta Berling's Saga, and it's from an album that I'm not going to butcher the name from, but I think it's Cersophane or something like that. Cersophane, I don't know. Gösta Berling's Saga, Fort Europa.
All right, here we go. Okay, this was fantastic. I think we all learned a lot here. Hopefully some new bands for everybody to check out there. I would like to thank Henrik for joining me here at The Lair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay, and for everybody out there, let us know in the comments down below if you're familiar with any of these bands. Maybe you've got some recommendations from other albums to check out from these bands, or some other bands that you would recommend in sort of this style of prog that we were digging into today, all these different styles and everything. So I'd like to again thank Henrik for joining me here at The Lair. I'm going to try to get him back for our midweek Maiden show. Check out the links down below in the description for the Spotify podcast, where you'll get to hear the songs that we picked here during this episode. And I will leave links to Henrik's various projects. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.